"You're coming with me," said the solitary rancher to the woman shunned for bearing 3 daughters. The wind rolled across the prairie like a whisper from another world. Golden grasses swayed under the late afternoon sun, their long blades brushing against one another with a sound softer than rain. In the distance, a cluster of weather-beaten houses huddled together like frightened animals. The town was small, tight-knit, and merciless to anyone who did not fit the mold of its expectations. Mary had learned that cruelty came not just from a husband's fist, but also from the silence of neighbors who looked away. She held her youngest daughter against her chest, the child's soft cheek damp with tears. The 2 older girls clung to her skirt, their wide eyes scanning the dusty street as if the ground itself might rise up against them. Mary's lip was swollen, her cheek darkened by a bruise that spread like spilled ink across pale skin. All because she had dared to bring life into the world, 3 times, and each time a girl. Her husband had wanted a son. No, not wanted, demanded. A man to carry his name, to work his fields, to stand at his side like a reflection of his pride. But nature had not obeyed. First came Anna, then Ruth, and then little Clara, barely a year old. Each birth had stolen a piece of Mary's body, but each daughter had filled her heart with a light she thought nothing could extinguish. Until the day the blows began. The whispers of the townsfolk were sharper than any lash. 3 girls. No sons. She's cursed. Some women crossed the street when they saw her. Men snickered. And when her husband finally cast her out, bruised, broken, holding 3 daughters and nothing else, no one stopped him. Now Mary stood in the street, dirt caking the hem of her skirt, clutching her children as if her arms alone could shield them from the world's cruelty. "Ma, where do we go?" Anna, the eldest at 8, tugged gently on her sleeve. Her voice was small, uncertain, yet far too old for her years. Mary swallowed the lump in her throat. "We'll find a place," she whispered, though her own voice shook with doubt. But she had nowhere. No money. No family who would take her back. She could scrub floors, sew, cook, but in this place every door would be slammed in her face. She was marked, unwanted, and everyone knew it. She shifted Clara to her other arm and turned away from the street, intending to walk out toward the wide, empty land. Better to risk the open prairie than stay where cruelty lurked behind every shuttered window. Miles away, a man named Daniel Harper worked alone at his ranch. The land stretched wide under his care, miles of fenced pasture, a weathered barn, a small cabin perched on a hill like a lone sentinel. The silence of it had become his only companion. For 12 years he had lived without a woman's laughter in his house, without children's voices echoing through the walls. People called him the solitary rancher. Some said he liked it that way, others whispered that he was strange. The truth was heavier. Once, long ago, Daniel had dreamed of a family. He had been young, hopeful, and deeply in love. But life had torn that hope from him in the cruelest of ways. His wife, Emma, had died giving birth, and the child had not survived either. The house that was meant to be filled with warmth had become a tomb of silence. Since then, Daniel worked his land in quiet determination, his only companions the cattle and the wind. The world thought he was cold. In truth, he was simply tired of losing. That afternoon, he rode into town for supplies. The general store was half full, townsfolk murmuring and gossiping the way they always did. Daniel paid them no mind until he saw her. Mary. She stood outside, clutching 3 children, her face marked with bruises that spoke of a cruelty no woman should endure. Daniel had heard the whispers in town, how her husband had driven her out, how folks muttered about her being cursed. He never cared for gossip, but the sight before him cut deeper than any rumor. 3 little girls, clinging to a mother who looked one gust of wind away from collapsing. He watched her step off the boardwalk, eyes downcast, shoulders bent as if carrying not just the baby in her arms but the weight of the entire world. For a moment, Daniel thought of riding past. It wasn't his business. It wasn't his fight. But then Anna looked up at her mother with wide, frightened eyes, and something inside him shifted. The image struck him like a blow, the same ache he had buried years ago. The ache of what could have been. Mary walked toward the edge of town, her breath shallow, each step heavier than the last. Her arms trembled from holding Clara. The other girls stumbled beside her, their small hands clutching hers as though she were their only anchor. "Ma, I'm tired," Ruth whimpered. Mary stopped, her body swaying with exhaustion. She couldn't keep going like this. Not with 3 hungry children, not with no roof over their heads. She blinked back tears, whispering, "Lord, please, give me a sign." A shadow fell across her path. She looked up and saw him, Daniel Harper, the solitary rancher, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a face carved by years of weather and solitude. He stood beside his horse, reins in hand, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. Mary tightened her grip on her daughters. She stammered, unsure whether to flee or beg. Daniel's gaze swept over her, then to the children, then back. He saw the bruise on her cheek, the tremor in her arms, the fear she tried to hide. Something in him broke loose, something long buried beneath years of silence. "You can't keep walking," he said firmly. Mary bit her lip. "We have nowhere else." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he stepped closer, his shadow covering them all, and spoke the words that would change everything. "You're coming with me." Mary froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. No man had ever spoken to her with such quiet certainty. Not a request, not pity, but a decision as solid as the earth beneath her feet. I can't," she whispered, clutching Clara tighter. "We'll only be a burden." Daniel's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. "I've lived with silence for 12 years. A burden's not what I see." The girls peered up at him with wide eyes. Anna, the eldest, whispered, "Ma, is he safe?" Mary looked at the rancher, the man everyone called solitary, strange, alone. She saw no cruelty in him, no judgment, only a quiet strength that felt like shelter after a storm. And for the first time in years, she let herself hope. Slowly, she nodded. Daniel extended his hand. "Come on, then." With trembling fingers, Mary reached for it. And as the sun dipped low behind the prairie, casting long shadows across the ground, she and her daughters took their first step toward a new life. The Harper Ranch lay quiet beneath the glow of twilight. The wooden cabin stood sturdy on the hill, smoke curling gently from the chimney, while the cattle grazed lazily in the pastures below. To Mary, who had only ever known houses filled with harsh words and colder hearts, the place seemed almost unreal, too still, too safe, like a dream she feared might vanish at any moment. Inside, Daniel moved with a steady, deliberate grace. He lit a lamp, set bread and stew on the table, and fetched a wooden chair for each of the girls. He said little, his manner quiet, but his actions spoke volumes. Mary sat with Clara in her arms, her eyes darting between him and the children. The girls devoured the food like they hadn't eaten properly in days. Anna whispered a shy thank you. Ruth glanced up with sauce on her chin, uncertain if she was allowed to smile. Daniel only nodded, but a flicker of warmth crossed his weathered face. Mary hesitated before lifting her own spoon. Her hands trembled. She was not used to kindness coming without a price. "Eat," Daniel said softly. Her eyes lifted, meeting his. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she lowered her gaze and obeyed. Over the following days, the rhythm of ranch life began to settle around them. Daniel rose before dawn, tending to the horses and cattle, chopping wood, and riding the fences. The girls followed him at a distance, curious but shy. Slowly, he let them closer. He showed Anna how to check the water troughs, guided Ruth's small hands on a brush as she groomed a horse, and let Clara toddle in the grass under his watchful eye. Mary watched these moments with a heart that ached in unfamiliar ways. She had never seen a man treat her daughters with such patience. Their father had only ever called them disappointments, never children to be cherished. But here, on this lonely ranch, the girls began to laugh again. Their voices rang like bells through the open air, and each time Daniel paused in his work, as though the sound stirred something deep inside him. At night, Mary helped in the kitchen. She mended old shirts, scrubbed the floor, and made sure the girls were washed and tucked in. Daniel often sat at the table with a ledger or a book, his presence steady but unobtrusive. They exchanged few words, yet the silence between them felt different from the silence of loneliness. It was companionable, almost gentle. Still, Mary carried fear in her heart. She often woke in the night, clutching Clara close, haunted by the thought of her husband storming through the door to drag them all back. More than once she startled at the sound of hoofbeats, only to find it was Daniel returning from the barn. One evening, she found the courage to ask. Why did you take us in?" she whispered, her hands tightening around her sewing. Daniel looked at her across the lamplight. His eyes were steady, unreadable, but his voice carried a quiet truth. "Because no one else would. And because I've lived too long with emptiness." Mary lowered her gaze, her throat tight. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught behind years of pain. The peace did not last long. Whispers began to spread in town. The solitary rancher had taken in the woman and her cursed daughters. Some called it pity, others scandal. And then, one day, her husband returned. He came riding up the dusty trail, his face twisted with rage and drink. The girls screamed and clung to Mary as he stormed toward the porch. "You think you can just leave me?" he spat. His hand shot out to grab her arm, but before he could touch her, Daniel stepped between them. The rancher's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of steel. "She's not yours to hurt anymore." The man sneered. "And who are you to say that?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm the one who'll stop you." For a tense moment, silence hung heavy. Then the husband lunged. Daniel moved faster. Years of ranch work had built him into a wall of strength. With one shove, he sent the man stumbling back. The husband cursed, scrambled to his horse, and rode off, vowing revenge. Mary collapsed onto the steps, shaking. Daniel crouched beside her, his hand hovering near hers. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "I won't let him touch you again." Her eyes filled with tears. No one had ever defended her. Not once. The days that followed brought subtle changes. Mary no longer looked at the ground when she walked. The girls sang as they worked, their laughter weaving itself into the fabric of the ranch. And Daniel, though he spoke little, seemed to carry himself differently, as though their presence had filled a void he'd stopped admitting was there. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Mary stepped out onto the porch. The prairie stretched before her, bathed in moonlight, vast and endless. Daniel was there, sitting on the steps with his hat in his hands. "I should thank you," she said softly. He glanced at her. "For what?" "For giving my girls a home. For giving me one." The silence lingered, broken only by the chirp of crickets. Then Daniel's voice, low and almost hesitant. "I lost my wife. Long time ago. Lost the child, too. Thought I'd never hear laughter in this house again." Mary's breath caught. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just a solitary rancher but a man carrying scars of his own. She reached out, her hand brushing his. "Maybe we can both start again." His fingers closed gently around hers, rough and warm. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to hope. Weeks turned into months. Mary grew stronger, her laughter returning in moments she thought she'd forgotten how to feel. Daniel became more than a protector. He became a partner, a quiet constant who stood beside her in everything. The girls adored him, racing to greet him after chores, climbing onto his lap with stories and giggles. The town's whispers never stopped, but Mary no longer cared. She had found a home, a family, and a man whose love spoke not in grand words but in steady actions. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Daniel took Mary's hand and looked into her eyes. "You're not just staying here because you need a roof," he said softly. "You're staying because I want you here. All of you. For good." Tears shimmered in Mary's eyes. She had been beaten, shunned, cast aside, but here, on this quiet ranch with a man who carried his own wounds, she had found something stronger than survival. She had found love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady at last. "For good." And in the silence of the wide prairie, under the watchful stars, the solitary rancher and the woman once shunned began their new life, not in loneliness, but in love.